The fever's death rattle echoed through Cole Rawlins's cabin as he clung to his wife's frail hand, powerless to stop her life from slipping away in the brutal Colorado winter of 1878. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Maybel Hart, once so full of laughter and grace, now lay wasted by sickness. Her golden hair clung damp to her forehead, her blue eyes dulled by delirium. The mountain doctor had tried it all. Bitter willow bark tea, cool cloths, even the last of Cole's whiskey. But nothing broke the grip of influenza that had swept through Pinecrest Valley. It had claimed its dearest victim yet. "Promise me," Maybel whispered, her voice barely rising above the wind's mournful howl outside the cabin walls. "Promise me you'll write to Ruby. She'll come. She always said she would, if—" Cole nodded, tears streaking down his weathered face. 32 years old, he had faced outlaws, lived through a Comanche raid, and endured 3 years of merciless drought. But nothing had prepared him for this, losing the woman who had been his wife for 8 years. "I promise." "May," he choked, pressing her trembling fingers to his lips. "I'll write to your sister." Her last breath slipped away as gently as snow settling on a window ledge. Cole sat unmoving for hours, still gripping her hand as it cooled. Outside, the firewood needed chopping. The animals cried for feed, yet the big cowboy remained frozen. His world shattered, the cabin they had built, now nothing but a hollow shell. Nothing. The funeral was small, but solemn. Every one of Pinecrest's 23 souls braved the bitter January cold. Reverend Malachi Givens spoke words Cole scarcely heard. He nodded absently when neighbors pressed hands of sympathy into his accepted covered dishes he knew he would never touch, and returned to the silent cabin to pen the hardest letter of his life. "Dear Miss Ruby Dalton, it is with the deepest sorrow that I write to tell you of your sister's passing. Influenza carried her from us 3 days ago. In her final moments, she asked that I send for you." Cole's large hand shook as he dipped the pen again. How could he confess he'd failed her, that the rugged frontier life he had promised had taken her instead? He forced himself to finish with the practicals, the date, the homestead's location should. Ruby wished to visit her grave, then sealed it without rereading. He knew it would take weeks to reach Boston, where Maybel had said Ruby taught at a ladies' finishing school. Cole had never laid eyes on Ruby, though Maybel spoke of her often, the younger sister, who had raised her after their parents' deaths, who had sacrificed her own chances so Maybel could wed and head west with the man she loved. Winter bled into spring, and Cole drifted through his chores like a shadow, feeding stock, mending fence, nodding grimly to neighbors who still looked at him with pity. By night, he'd sit on the porch, staring at the stars Maybel once adored, nursing just enough whiskey to dull the ache without shirking his duties. In early May, the unexpected sound of a stagecoach rattling into Pinecrest stirred the town. Cole was at Buck Slater's general store gathering supplies when the storekeeper called. "Rawlins, someone's here asking after you." Cole turned, his heart catching as he saw a woman standing on the porch. For a breathless instant, he thought Maybel had somehow returned, same honey gold hair, similar delicate features. But as he stepped closer, the differences revealed themselves. This woman was taller, her stance more rigid, her eyes a deeper blue. She wore a navy traveling dress, Eastern in cut and quality. "Mr. Rawlins," she said, voice firm, but cautious. "I'm Ruby Dalton, Maybel's sister." Cole pulled off his hat, suddenly ashamed of his unkempt beard, his worn shirt. "Miss Dalton, I wasn't expecting you." "I received your letter," she answered simply, her gaze steady and unflinching, unsettling him more than a drawn six-gun ever had. "I've come to pay my respects." And she paused, glancing at the curious townsfolk. "Perhaps we could speak in private." Cole nodded, helping the driver unload her trunk and carpet bag. "My wagon's just yonder. It's about 5 miles to the place." The ride was heavy with silence, the kind that only binds those who share grief. Cole stole glances at her, her straight posture despite the jolting wagon, her gloved hands folded neatly. "Maybel wrote to me often about this valley," Ruby said at last, as they crested a hill revealing wildflowers scattered across the slopes. She said spring blossoms made the long winters worth it. Cole's throat tightened. They were her favorite. The hills are full of them now. Ruby blinked away sudden tears, and for the first time she seemed more flesh and blood than polished Eastern lady. "She loved it here," Cole murmured. Even when life was hard, she never once complained. "That sounds like May," Ruby said softly, a sad smile curving her lips. She always found beauty everywhere. When the homestead came into view, Cole felt a pang of pride and shame mixed. The cabin was sturdy with the new addition he'd built last summer to give Maybel the bigger kitchen she longed for. But her flower beds lay strangled with weeds, and the curtains she'd sewn hung limp and dusty. "It isn't much," he muttered, helping Ruby down. "But it's home." "It's exactly as she described," Ruby answered, her eyes taking in every detail. She was proud of what you built together. Inside, Cole flushed at the mess he'd let pile up, dishes stacked high, clothes tossed over chairs, Maybel's pressed wildflowers gathering dust on the mantel. "I'll set your things in the spare room," Cole said quickly, hefting her trunk. "It's not much, but there's a bed, Mr. Rollins." Ruby interrupted gently. "Please don't trouble yourself. I know what grief does to a home." Something in her tone, a quiet depth that came from lived experience, stopped him in his tracks. "You're kinder than I deserve, Miss Dalton. More than I deserve, Ruby." Dalton slipped off her gloves and set her hat neatly aside. "I'm not here to judge you, Mr. Rollins. Maybel was the only family I had left, and—" She paused, choosing her words with care. "She asked me to come if anything ever happened to her." Cole frowned. "She told you that in her letters?" Ruby nodded. She worried this place was too far from help. Worried what might happen if exactly what did happen ever came to pass. Her breath caught before she steadied herself. "She made me promise I would come." "She never told me," Cole said quietly. "She wouldn't have wanted to trouble you," Ruby replied, her eyes steady. "But I gave her my word, and I keep my word, Mr. Rollins." "Cole," he corrected, almost without thinking. "Please." "Call me Cole." "Cole," she repeated softly, and hearing his name on her lips struck him like a fresh wound, and a strange comfort all at once. "I've taken a leave from the school where I teach. I can stay 3 months, long enough to put things in order, visit Maybel's grave, and—" She swept her gaze around the room. "Make sure you're getting by." Cole should have bristled at the thought of needing help, but instead he felt something close to relief, so sharp and sudden it nearly buckled him. He had been drowning for months, and this woman, a stranger yet bound to him through Maybel, was offering him air. "I'd be grateful, Miss Dalton," he said, voice rough with sincerity. And Maybel would be too. Her smile was small, but genuine. "Then it's settled. And call me Ruby." That first evening carved out a rhythm that carried into the weeks ahead. Ruby, after touring the cabin, wasted no time setting things right. She didn't scold, didn't comment on the mess. She simply rolled up her sleeves and went to work, sorting, scrubbing, straightening. Cole, unsettled by her presence, fled to the barn, throwing himself into chores that never ended. When he returned at dusk, he was stunned to find the table neatly set, the scent of fresh bread filling the air, and a pot of stew simmering on the stove. His stomach growled in a way it hadn't for months. "You didn't have to cook," he said awkwardly, standing in the doorway with his hat twisting in his hands. I enjoy it, Ruby replied easily. Maybel wrote that you're fond of venison stew. I found some in the smokehouse. Cole's throat tightened. That venison came from his last hunt with Maybel, the one where she'd insisted on learning to smoke the meat herself. He hadn't touched it since she died. That was thoughtful, he managed. They ate mostly in silence, though it wasn't an uncomfortable one. Cole found himself watching Ruby how different she was from Maybel. Where Maybel had been soft and easy, Ruby was precise and composed. Yet at times, a tilt of her head, or the way she tucked hair behind her ear, mirrored his late wife so closely it made his heart ache. "Will you show me her grave tomorrow?" Ruby asked suddenly, laying down her spoon. Cole nodded. "Of course, it's just up the rise to the east. She always said it had the best view of the valley." "She would have liked that," Ruby said softly. Then her tone shifted. "Your vegetable garden needs tending. Maybel wrote that you grew most of your food." "We did," Cole admitted. "I haven't had the heart to plant this spring. Then tomorrow after we visit Maybel we'll plant," Ruby said firmly. "It's not too late for a summer crop." Cole wanted to object to explain he couldn't bring himself to do those tasks without Maybel. But something in Ruby's steady look silenced him. This wasn't about sentiment. It was survival. And Maybel would have insisted the same. "All right," he agreed. "We'll plant tomorrow." The next morning broke clear and warm. Cole led Ruby up the slope to the wooden cross he had set in a grove of aspens overlooking the cabin and valley below. Wildflowers spilled across the hillside in every color. Cole hung back while Ruby knelt at the grave. She pulled a small book from her pocket and read aloud, her voice steady and clear. Cole recognized the verses. It was a poem Maybel had loved, speaking of death as a doorway, not an end. Hearing it in Ruby's voice brought tears that stung his eyes. When she finished, Ruby bowed her head for several minutes in silence. Cole turned away, granting her privacy. When she rose at last, her eyes were rimmed red but dry. "She loved poetry," Ruby said simply. "Our mother taught us both to recite before we could read," Cole remembered. She'd say it made the work pass quicker. Ruby nodded. She was always finding ways to ease hard things. She glanced back at the grave, then straightened her shoulders. "She'd want us to carry on, wouldn't she?" "She would." Cole agreed, comforted by the bond of shared love for the same woman. The rest of the day, they worked the garden. Cole was surprised to find Ruby, despite her Eastern polish, knew her way around a hoe and seeds. She moved with practiced efficiency, digging and planting without complaint. "Maybel told me you were a teacher," Cole remarked as they worked side by side. "Didn't figure you'd know farming." Ruby gave a faint smile. "Before I taught in Boston, I worked at a small school in Vermont. Most of my students were farm children. I learned from them so I could understand their lives better." Before teaching at the finishing school back east, Ruby Dalton had once worked at a small country school in Vermont. Most of her pupils were farm kids, and she dug in the soil beside them, learning their chores so she could better understand their world. She brushed a loose strand of hair from her brow with the back of her wrist. "Besides, Maybel and I grew up on a little farm outside Boston before our parents passed. I've always kept a kitchen garden even when I lived in the city." Cole Rollins nodded quietly, impressed. Maybel never said a word about that. "She was young when we lost our folks," Ruby explained. "I was 12, she was only 7. She likely didn't remember much about that farm life." Days slipped into a steady rhythm neither of them had expected. By day, Cole tended livestock and mended the fences and sheds left to ruin during his mourning, while Ruby brought order back to the cabin and coaxed life into the garden. Evenings found them sharing meals and little by little conversation. Cole learned Ruby was 28, 4 years younger than Maybel would have been. She'd never married, choosing instead to build a life of teaching and standing by her sister after their parents' death. She was well-read, full of opinions on politics and literature, though she carried herself with a restraint that showed she wasn't used to giving voice to all she thought. In return, Ruby drew Cole out of his silence, nudging him to talk about Maybel, in terms of her life, not just her passing. He told her of their journey west. The sweat poured into raising the homestead, the dreams Maybel had held for their future. "She wrote to me about the orchard you meant to plant," Ruby said one evening, as they sat on the porch, the sunset spilling gold and purple across the valley. Cole's throat tightened. "We ordered the saplings. They arrived 2 weeks after she died." "I couldn't bring myself to," he shook his head. "They're still in the cellar wrapped in burlap. Likely dead by now." "Maybe not," Ruby said thoughtfully. "Saplings can be stubborn survivors if they're stored right. We could check tomorrow." To Cole's surprise, 5 of the 10 trees still showed green when unwrapped. At Ruby's urging, they planted them in the sunny spot Maybel had chosen. "She'll never see them bear fruit," Cole said heavily, patting the soil down around the last one. "No," Ruby answered softly, meeting his eyes. "But someone will. Life doesn't stop, Cole." Maybel knew that better than anyone. By June, the homestead beat with new rhythm. The garden thrived under Ruby's hand, the apple trees rooted deep, and Cole found himself waking with purpose instead of dread. Ruby herself began to change. The stiff manners she'd arrived with melted away. She took to simpler dresses, sleeves, rolled-up hair tied with a ribbon instead of pins. Cole heard her humming the same frontier tunes Maybel had loved, even laughing at the barn cat's mischief, or the stubborn rooster that strutted like he owned the place. It was Ruby who suggested they attend the midsummer social in Pinecrest. Cole resisted at first. He couldn't imagine celebrating while Maybel lay in her grave, but Ruby was firm. "The people have been kind to you," she reminded him. "Maybel would want you to keep those ties." So he drove the wagon into town on a warm June evening, Ruby seated beside him in her best blue cotton dress that lit her eyes. He felt the weight of whispers sure to follow a widower arriving with his late wife's sister only 5 months after her passing, but Ruby's calm presence steadied him. The social was held in the new schoolhouse decked with wildflowers and lit with lanterns. Folks from Pinecrest and the outlying homesteads filled the place. Cole braced himself for awkwardness, but instead found handshakes and quiet approval. Women pulled Ruby into conversation while the men clapped his back and welcomed him out of solitude. "You've got yourself a good helper," Virgil Boone said with a knowing look. "Miss Dalton's made quite a mark on those vegetables. Saw him last week, best garden in the county." "She's been a blessing," Cole admitted, watching Ruby across the room chatting with Hattie Boone. "Don't know how I'd have managed without her." Virgil studied him. "She planning to stay?" The question jarred Cole. He'd been living so close to each day he hadn't thought beyond August. "She took a 3-month leave from her school back east," he said slowly. "She's meant to go back then." "Shame," Virgil muttered. "Seems to me she fits right in." Before Cole could answer, the fiddler struck up a tune and the crowd made space for dancing. Cole stayed to the side, content to watch until Ruby approached him after a few reels, her cheeks flushed, eyes bright with mischief. "Mrs. Boone tells me you're quite the dancer," she teased. "She says Maybel always bragged you never missed a chance to show off your steps." Cole felt the heat rise to his face. She exaggerated. "Well," Ruby said, her tone playful, but carrying a subtle challenge. "I've promised this next one to Clyde Slater, but after that, perhaps you'll prove whether my sister was telling the truth." Before Cole Rollins could answer, Ruby Dalton was whisked away by young Clyde Slater leaving him to wrestle with thoughts he hadn't dared entertain in months. The idea of dancing again felt almost like disloyalty to Maybel's memory. Yet as he watched Ruby move gracefully across the floor, he couldn't help recalling how Maybel had loved socials, how she'd tug at his arm until he agreed to attend every gathering within a day's ride. When the tune ended and Ruby returned, breathless and smiling, Cole made his choice. "I believe you asked for proof of my dancing skills, Miss Dalton," he said, offering his arm with an old-fashioned courtesy that drew a laugh from her. "Indeed I did, Mr. Rollins," she answered, slipping her hand through his arm. The fiddler eased into a waltz, slow and intimate compared to the reels that had come before. Cole hesitated before resting his hand at her waist. Even such a proper gesture startled him, for it had been so long since he'd touched a woman at all. Sensing his unease, Ruby held his gaze. "It's just a dance, Cole," she said gently. "We're honoring life, not shaming death." Her words loosened the chains around his heart. As they moved in time with the music, he felt something stir inside him, a flicker of joy he thought buried with Maybel. Ruby was a different partner, steadier, more measured, but her grace made guiding her through the steps unexpectedly sweet. Around them he caught approving nods, Mrs. Slater's subtle smile, even Reverend Ephraim Tate's wife offering encouragement. These folks had watched him stumble through grief's shadows. Now they saw him stepping, however cautiously, back toward the light. The waltz ended too soon, and Cole released her reluctantly. "Thank you," he said simply. "The pleasure was mine," Ruby replied, and the warmth in her smile reached places in him he thought forever closed. The ride back was easy, Ruby recounting the conversations she'd shared, Cole pointing out constellations scattered across the night sky. For the first time since Maybel's death, life felt almost normal, just a man and a woman heading home after a night in town. Yet Virgil Boone's question haunted him: how long would she stay? Ruby's leave ended in August. The thought of her leaving pressed on him like a weight. In a few short weeks, she had become part of the homestead of him. "You're awfully quiet," Ruby observed, as the cabin came into view. Just thinking, Cole admitted helping her down from the wagon. "Virgil asked how long you'll be staying." Ruby's expression softened in the moonlight. "That is practical. My leave ends mid-August." Cole busied himself unhitching the horses. "The place will feel mighty empty when you go." She was silent a moment. "I've grown fond of it here. More than I expected." Something in her tone made Cole glance up. Ruby stood in the silver light, gazing at the cabin with real affection. "It suits you," he said before he could stop himself. "More than I ever imagined." She turned, smiling faintly. "Maybel always said I was too stiff for frontier life. She'd be surprised to see me settling in. I think she'd be glad," Cole said honestly. "She wanted you to come west, said the mountain air would cure your city ways." Ruby laughed, a full, unrestrained laugh that Cole realized he had rarely heard. "That sounds like May always urging me to live a little." They walked toward the cabin, the silence between them strangely comforting. It felt dangerous, this ease, a mixture of solace and guilt. The weeks that followed brought changes both to the land and between them. July found the garden bursting with more produce than two people could eat, so Ruby set about preserving. Soon the cabin filled with the tang of pickles and the sweet steam of jam. Cole discovered himself looking forward to scenes that greeted him. Ruby with flour dusting her cheek. Ruby crouched in the garden harvesting beans, Ruby on the porch in the evening light, mending his shirt with the same neat stitches Maybel once used. Those images tangled his heart. Gratitude, guilt, longing, dread of the day she'd leave. He began inventing reasons to share her tasks, suggesting evening walks to check the apple saplings or pick wild berries. Ruby, for her part, shed more of her Eastern polish. She laughed easier, spoke more freely, and adopted habits she once viewed with suspicion. One morning, Cole caught her drinking coffee straight from the pot when she thought no one was looking. The sheepish grin she gave him made him chuckle out loud. Elizabeth would never believe it, he teased. Ruby Dalton tilted her chin with a spark in her eye. Your proper sister drinking Cowboy coffee straight from the pot. Maybel knew me better than you think. Who do you reckon taught me to ride astride instead of side saddle when no one was looking? For once, the mention of Maybel didn't slice through Cole Rollins like a knife. Instead, it felt like comfort proof that pieces of her still lived on through Ruby. It was during one of their evening walks to check the apple saplings that something between them shifted. They were talking about expanding the orchard when a summer storm rolled in fierce and fast. Rain pelted down, soaking them in moments. Laughing, they sprinted for the cabin, dripping water across the wooden floor. Ruby's composure cracked. She laughed so hard tears streaked her cheeks, her golden hair clinging in wet ropes. Her dress plastered to her frame in a way that made Cole suddenly painfully aware she was not just Maybel's sister, but a woman standing in front of him. Your face when that first drop hit, she gasped, still laughing. I've never seen anyone glare at the sky like it insulted him personally. Cole chuckled, dragging a wet hand through his hair. It was the principle of the thing. That cloud waited till we were the farthest from shelter. Ruby's laughter fell into hiccups. She wiped her eyes, still grinning. We'd better change before we catch cold. I'll build the fire, you fetch the towels. Cole was glad for the task, grateful for the space to steady himself. When he returned, Ruby was at the hearth skirts, dripping as she wrung water from the fabric. The firelight shimmered against her hair, turning it to molten gold. She looked beautiful, not with Maybel's sunny warmth, but with her own kind of strength and clarity. He must have made a sound, because she turned and caught him staring. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of how the ground beneath them was changing. Here Cole said at last, offering a towel. You're shivering. Ruby's fingers brushed his as she took it, the small contact jolting him in ways he hadn't felt in so long. Thank you, she murmured. I should change, he muttered, retreating to his room. When he returned in dry clothes, Ruby had braided her damp hair and set a pot of tea on the stove. She looked calm, domestic, and heartbreakingly natural in his cabin. I thought tea might warm us up, she said, her voice even as if the moment by the fire hadn't happened. Perfect, Cole replied, just as careful. They sipped in silence, both deep in thought. It was Ruby who broke it. Cole. We need to talk about my departure. It's less than a month away now. He nodded, chest tight. Of course, you'll need a wagon to Denver to meet the eastbound train. That's not what I meant. Ruby set down her cup, her gaze steady. We need to be sure you're ready for winter. The garden will need harvesting, the stock needs preparing, and you'll be alone again. Her words hung heavy. I managed, before Cole said harsher than he meant. Did you? Ruby's voice softened. When I came, you were only surviving. That isn't living. I worry about leaving you to face another winter, especially with all these reminders of Maybel. Cole stared into his tea, avoiding her eyes. What would you have me do? Sell out, move back east? No, Ruby said firmly. This is your home. You and May built it together. Her spirit is here, but maybe you should think about hiring help, or finding someone to share your life again. Cole's head snapped up, his gaze sharp. Ruby, she's been gone barely 6 months. How can you even say that because I knew my sister? Ruby answered, her cheeks flushed, but her voice steady. Maybel loved life. She wouldn't want you to lock yourself away in grief. She'd want you to keep living. The truth of it hit Cole like a fist. Maybel had always urged him not to put off joy for duty's sake. She'd teased him for being too cautious, for waiting too long to embrace life. "It's too soon," he rasped, at last his voice thick with emotion. "Maybe so," Ruby Dalton conceded, "but out here time doesn't march the same way it does in the city. Life and death ride a lot closer to the surface." Maybel knew that. She reached across the table, her fingers grazing Cole Rollins' hand. "I'm not suggesting anything improper, Cole. I just want you to think about what comes next." Her touch lingered long after she pulled away. "I'll think on it," he promised, though he had no notion what such thinking would even mean. That night, sleep refused him. Cole lay staring at the ceiling, wrestling with feelings he'd been shoving aside for weeks. Ruby had become more than Maybel's sister, more than a helping hand. She had breathed life back into his home, into him. The thought of her leaving brought on a dread that had nothing to do with chores or stock. It was deeper, sharper. And yet what kind of man dared let himself feel something for his late wife's sister after only 6 months? Come dawn, he saddled up and rode out to the far pasture, seeking solitude. Sitting on a fallen log, with the whole valley stretched before him, he finally let his mind stray to dangerous ground. What if Ruby didn't go back to Boston? What if she stayed, not as Maybel's sister, not as a guest, but as something more? The thought both thrilled and scared him. It meant admitting life still moved forward, that love could take root again, even in soil watered with grief. But Ruby had given him no sign beyond kindness and duty. She had her own world in Boston, students' colleagues, a respectable post. What could he offer against all that? By late afternoon, he rode back no closer to answers, but oddly lighter for facing the questions. Ruby sat on the porch with one of Maybel's books in her lap, the setting sun painting her face in soft gold. "I was starting to worry," she said with a smile that made his heart stumble. "You were gone a long while." "Had some thinking to do," Cole admitted, lowering himself into the chair beside her. "About what I said last night," she asked, closing the book. And Cole said slowly, "I still don't know what the future looks like. But I do know these weeks with you here have made this place feel like home again. I'm grateful for that, no matter what happens." Something gentled in her eyes. That's all Maybel would have wanted. Her name no longer built a wall between them. It bridged them a shared love for the woman who had shaped both their lives. They sat quiet as the sun dipped behind the mountains, each lost in possibilities they weren't yet ready to speak. In the days that followed, a subtle awareness grew between them. Fingers brushed when passing a dish, eyes lingered longer than needed, conversations stretched deep into the night. Cole noticed details he'd overlooked before: the proud line of her neck, when she bent to her sewing, the iron will behind her work, the sly humor that appeared when she relaxed. Ruby was not. Maybel would never be her, but she was remarkable in her own right. And Ruby seemed tangled in her own battle. Sometimes she spoke freely of her thoughts and feelings about the homestead. Sometimes she retreated into that careful politeness from her first days there. Cole often caught her watching him, with an expression he couldn't read, something between confusion and longing. The turning point came with a letter delivered by a neighbor on his way through. Ruby opened it at breakfast, her brow furrowing as she read. "Bad news?" Cole asked when she finally set it down. "Not exactly." She stirred her coffee absently. "The school board wants confirmation of when I'll be back. They're making plans for the fall term." Cole nodded, fighting the heaviness in his gut. "I reckon they need to know." "Yes." "I should answer right away. They've already been generous with my leave." "When would you have to leave?" "The second week of August," Ruby said, finally meeting his eyes. "Just over 2 weeks from now." The words hung like a noose between them, every unspoken question suddenly urgent. Cole wanted to beg her to stay, to confess what she had come to mean to him. But the words wouldn't come. What right did he have to pull her from her life back east, To ask her to trade security for the gamble of frontier living with a man still haunted by his wife's ghost. "I'll see about getting you to Denver," he said instead, standing abruptly. "I'd better check the north pasture fence." He worked himself to exhaustion that day, pushing harder than the chores demanded, trying to beat down the storm in his chest. When he came back, sweat-soaked and sore, Ruby was at Maybel's writing desk, papers spread out in her neat hand. "I've made a list," Ruby Dalton said without preamble, as Cole Rollins stepped inside. "Everything that needs tending after I leave the harvest winter stores the preserves." She pressed the papers into his hands, her face set with practical determination. I tried to be thorough. Cole glanced at the neat instructions, every line a reminder of things he should have managed, but hadn't. The care in each note squeezed his chest. "That's mighty thoughtful," he said, though the words felt small. "I want to be sure you'll be all right," Ruby replied evenly. Maybel would expect no less. But Maybel's name, once a comfort, now hung between them like a wall. Cole started Ruby, then stopped, unsure how to bridge the gulf. She studied him for a heartbeat. Then something like resignation flickered across her eyes. "I should finish packing," she said softly. "There's still plenty to put in order." He moved aside as she headed for her room. For the first time, he noticed how she had made it her own wildflowers in a jar, books stacked neatly, a quilt draped across the bed. Soon it would all be gone, as though she'd never been there. The thought cut him to the bone. "Don't go!" he blurted before he could stop himself. Ruby froze her hand on the door frame. "What did you say?" Cole drew a deep breath, stepping onto a path he hadn't dared name. "I'm asking you to stay, Ruby. Not just through the harvest, not just for the winter. I mean, for good." She turned slowly, guarded. "As what, Cole?" "Your housekeeper, your sister-in-law." He crossed the room close enough to see her pulse quicken. "As my wife," he said simply. "If you could ever think of such a thing." Her eyes widened, color rising in her cheeks. "Cole, we hardly know each other. And Maybel." "I loved Maybel," he interrupted gently. "I always will. But she's gone. And you've shown me life isn't done with me yet." He reached for her hand, half afraid she'd pull away. But she didn't. "I'm not asking you to replace her, no one could. I'm asking if you'd consider building something new with me." Ruby stared at their joined hands, her face troubled. "I came out of duty to my sister. I never imagined, neither did I," Cole admitted. "But I've come to care for you, Ruby, deeply, and I pray you feel even a piece of the same." Her gaze lifted vulnerable, raw. "I do," she whispered. "And it scares me half to death. It feels like betraying Maybel, like I'm stealing from her memory." Cole squeezed her hand. "Remember what you told me Maybel wouldn't want anyone to stop living on her account?" A sad smile tugged at her lips. "Using my own words against me, Mr. Rollins, only because they were true, Miss Dalton." She slipped her hand from his, not in rejection, but in need of space. "Even if I set Maybel aside, there are practical things, my position in Boston, my life there, the hardships here." "All fair," Cole said. "I'm not asking for an answer right now. Just don't leave without us talking through what could be." Ruby searched his face for doubt, and finding none, she nodded. "I need time. This is a lot." "Take all the time you need," Cole said, stepping back. She closed her door softly behind her. Cole stood in the cabin lighter, for having spoken yet burdened by the weight of her answer. He'd laid his heart bare. Now all he could do was wait. The next day, routine returned, but unease threaded every moment. Ruby worked quietly, lost in thought. Cole swung between hope and despair. By evening, tension thickened the air until he offered, "Maybe I should bunk in the barn tonight, give you more space." No, Ruby said firmly. We need to face this Cole. Running won't fix it. They sat at the table with a pot of tea between them, less like a couple, and more like negotiators at war. Ruby poured steadily, but Cole saw the furrow in her brow that only came with heavy matters. I've been thinking all day, she began. About your proposal. About Maybel. About what life might look like if I stayed. Cole said nothing, afraid to breathe wrong. I care for you, Ruby went on, her voice stronger now. More than I thought I would. More than is proper, maybe, but I can't deny it. Hope flared in him, but before he could speak, she held his eyes. But hear me, Cole. I won't be a replacement for Maybel. I won't live in her shadow, Ruby Dalton said firmly, her voice steady as steel. If I choose to stay, if I ever consider becoming your wife, it must be for who I am, not because of who Maybel was. Her words struck deep, and Cole Rollins saw at once that this was the heart of her fear, that she'd forever be measured against her sister and fall short. I would never ask that of you, he said earnestly. You're not Maybel. You're Ruby, with your own grit, your own ways, your own heart. That's the woman I've come to care for. Some of the tension in her shoulders eased. And the homestead? Would you expect me to run it exactly as she did? Cole shook his head. The homestead would be ours to shape together. You've already made changes, hell, the way you set up the root cellar, how you rearranged the kitchen. It works better than before. Maybel would have liked it. She always said her system was organized chaos. A faint smile tugged Ruby's lips. She wrote the same to me, said you could never find anything after she was done organizing. The shared memory softened the space between them, and Cole pressed on. That's just it, Ruby. Maybel will always be a part of us. Her lessons, her laughter, the foundation she helped lay here. But if we build a future, it'll be ours, not hers. Ruby stared into her tea for a long while, before lifting her gaze, resolve shining there. I need to visit her grave alone before I can give you an answer. Cole nodded understanding. Of course. Take whatever time you need. The next morning broke clear sunlight, spilling golden over the valley. Cole watched from the porch as Ruby walked up the slope to Maybel's grave, a handful of wildflowers in her grasp. She wore her blue dress, the one from the social, and had her hair pinned back in the simpler style she'd adopted here. Cole forced himself to busy his hands with chores, though his eyes kept straying to the hillside. Ruby knelt, laid the flowers at the wooden cross, and lingered there, perhaps seeking forgiveness, maybe asking for blessing, or simply saying goodbye. Whatever passed between her and Maybel's memory was sacred, not for him to intrude upon. When at last she rose, she stood still for a long moment, her face turned to the valley below, then made her way back down. Her eyes were clear, her expression calm. Cole set aside the harness he'd been mending and met her, his heart hammering. I've made my decision, Ruby said simply. Cole's breath caught. He couldn't answer. I will stay, she went on. I'll marry you not because you were Maybel's husband, not from duty, but because I found something here I never expected. I found a home, and feelings for you that I can't and don't want to deny. Joy surged through Cole so hard it left him speechless. At last he managed, Ruby. Thank you. I'll do everything in my power to make you happy. Her smile bloomed, unguarded and radiant. I believe you will. And I'll do the same for you. Cole stepped closer, took her hands. May I kiss you? He asked softly, suddenly shy. Yes, she whispered. I'd like that very much. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, more promise than passion. Yet even in its restraint, Cole felt something awaken in him, a spark of joy and belonging he thought he'd buried with Maybel. When they parted, he saw the same emotions reflected in Ruby's eyes. Hope tinged with sorrow, for the road that had brought them here. "I should write to the school," she said, her voice quieter now. "They'll need a replacement before term begins." Cole reluctantly released her hands. "And we should talk to Reverend Ephraim Tate about the wedding." "Yes," Ruby agreed. "Though maybe we should wait until autumn after the harvest. It would look more respectful." Cole's heart ached to claim her right then and there, but he understood. The community had watched him mourn. They'd need to see time pass. "Autumn, then," he said. Ruby nodded, pleased. "That would be fitting. It gives us time to be sure. And it honors Maybel." Her name no longer brought pain, but a shared bond, an acknowledgement of the strange, tender path that had led them together. "She'd approve," Cole said quietly. "She'd want us to find happiness." Ruby's eyes softened. "When we were girls, she always told me I was too serious, too bound by duty. She'd tease B, one day you'll have to follow your heart instead of your head." Maybe this is what she meant. Cole smiled at the glimpse of sisterly banter. "She called you B, only when she wanted to get under my skin," Ruby admitted with a laugh. "She knew I hated it." "And do you still?" Cole asked. Ruby considered her smile lingering. "I've always been proper precise, Beatrice, but maybe here in this new life." She trailed off as though opening a door to something yet unwritten. Ruby Dalton looked up at Cole Rollins with a tender smile. "Maybe I could be B, at least sometimes." Cole felt the weight of that small concession. It was more than a nickname. It was her opening to grow into someone new, just as he was learning to be more than the grief-stricken widower she had first met. "You can be whoever you choose out here," he told her softly. "That's the gift of the frontier, a chance to start fresh." The days that followed carried a new brightness. Ruby wrote to the school board explaining her choice to remain in Colorado and recommending one of her colleagues as her replacement. Cole rode into town to speak with Reverend Ephraim Tate, who agreed to perform the wedding ceremony in late September after the main harvest was in. Word of their engagement traveled fast through Pinecrest. Cole braced himself for sideways looks and whispers marrying his late wife's sister so soon. But to his surprise, most welcomed the news. The women especially seemed to find comfort in it, calling it both practical and deeply fitting. "Makes perfect sense," Hattie Boone declared after Sunday services. "Who better to carry on Maybel's work than her own sister? And who better to stand by Cole than someone who knows his loss?" Ruby met such comments with grace, never dismissing them, but never revealing the private truth of their growing bond either. In private, though, she and Cole explored that truth, freely unraveling each other's histories, trading their hopes and letting their guarded hearts stretch open. Cole discovered that beneath Ruby's polished manners was a woman of sharp conviction and surprising fire. She could argue politics like a seasoned campaigner, had strong ideas for how to improve the homestead, and even showed a mischievous side that surfaced when they were alone. Ruby in turn found in Cole a depth Elizabeth's letters had never captured: his wry humor, his quiet bond with the land, his unexpected love of books. Long winter nights had filled him with Emerson, Thoreau, even Shakespeare, and his vision for the homestead stretched beyond survival toward something enduring. By the time August melted into September, they worked in easy rhythm, bringing in the harvest, storing vegetables, boiling fruit into preserves. Shoulder to shoulder, their partnership took root in both labor and affection. Their kisses, their embraces came not as stolen moments, but as natural extensions of the life they were building. Still, they agreed Ruby would remain in the spare room until the vows were spoken. It wasn't about gossip out here. Few would know or care. It was about giving their union the dignity it deserved. Both felt their unlikely path to love demanded the honor of tradition. The wedding morning broke clear and cool, the aspens tipped with gold against the evergreens. They chose the homestead for the ceremony with only close neighbors gathered. Reverend Tate arrived early, his wife helping Ruby prepare inside, while Cole and the men arranged things in the yard. Cole had built an arbor himself, sturdy but graceful set, so the wide valley stretched out behind it. The women of Pinecrest, led by Hattie Boone, twined wild flowers and ribbons through its frame, making it simple yet beautiful. When the time came, Cole stood beneath it, wearing his best shirt and a new vest Ruby had helped him pick in town. His nerves fluttered, but beneath them was steady certainty this was the right choice. The crowd hushed as the cabin door opened. Virgil Boone stepped forward to escort Ruby, offering his arm in place of kin. Cole's breath caught as he saw her. She wore pale blue silk, no white, not under these circumstances, but she was radiant all the same. Her honey gold hair was adorned with tiny white blossoms, and she carried a bouquet of late summer wildflowers from the hillside. As she walked toward him, Cole felt it in his bones. This wasn't betrayal. It was renewal, not erasing Maybel's memory, but honoring it, continuing the life she'd helped begin here. Ruby's eyes locked on his steady and sure, and in that gaze every lingering doubt fell away. The ceremony was short, but it carried the weight of forever. Cole Rawlins and Ruby Dalton had chosen the old vows, words that had bound countless couples on the frontier before them, and found comfort in their simplicity. When Cole slid the plain gold band onto Ruby's finger, a ring he had ridden all the way to Denver to buy, he saw tears glisten in her eyes, mirroring the swell of emotion in his own chest. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Ephraim Tate declared, his voice steady and strong. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The yard erupted in cheers as Cole kissed his bride. This time, not the cautious, tender kiss of courtship, but a promise sealed with certainty, a vow of the life they would carve out together. The celebration was humble, but filled with joy. Tables sagged under the weight of food. Neighbors had brought fried chicken, loaves of bread, pies, jars of preserves. A fiddle struck up, and before long, the packed earth of the yard shook with the stomping feet of dancers. Cole and Ruby moved among friends, their hands finding each other again and again, as though drawn by unseen force. Toward evening, he noticed her gaze drift now and then toward the hillside where Maybel Hart rested. Not sorrowful, but thoughtful. "Would you like to go to her?" he asked quietly. Ruby shook her head gently. "Not today. Today is ours, our beginning." She squeezed his hand. "But tomorrow we can go together, tell her about the wedding, about the orchard." Cole nodded, his throat tight. "I'd like that." As the sun dipped low, casting the valley in gold and purple, neighbors hitched their wagons and rode away, leaving Cole and Ruby alone for the first time as husband and wife. On the porch, waving off the last wagon, Cole turned to her in the twilight. "Well, Mrs. Rawlins," he said softly, "welcome home." Ruby's smile was warm, steady. "I've been home a while now," she answered, "but thank you for making it official." Cole kissed her hand just above the band of gold. "Shall we head inside? I reckon there's a tradition about carrying brides across thresholds." Ruby laughed, a free, full sound he treasured. "I believe there is, Mr. Rawlins, but fair warning, I'm heavier than I look. I'll manage," he grinned, sweeping her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. Ruby gasped, then wrapped her arms around his neck, her eyes bright with joy and the spark of passion they had held in check for months. Crossing the threshold together, Cole felt a peace settle deep in his bones. This was not the life he and Maybel had first dreamed, but it was a good life, a blessed life, and he vowed to cherish it all. The first year of their marriage brought trial and blessing alike. Winter struck hard, burying the valley deep in snow, until Cole dug tunnels just to reach the barn. But inside the cabin, warmth reigned not only from the stove, but from the bond between them. Ruby proved herself a true partner for the frontier. She tracked stores in careful detail, planned meals to stretch the harvest, and found ways to make the household more efficient. More than that, she filled the cabin with laughter, reading aloud by lamplight, teaching Cole Boston card games, even pelting him with snowballs on bright winter days. Their intimacy, once hesitant, grew into something deep and fulfilling. Cole discovered that Ruby's reserve hid a fire equal to his own, and Ruby found in him a tenderness that made her feel cherished. Spring came late, but gloriously wildflowers spilling across the hills. True to her word, Ruby walked with Cole to Maybel's grave, often sometimes to share news of the homestead, sometimes just to sit in quiet remembrance. On one such morning in May, marking a year since Ruby first arrived, she turned to him with shining eyes. "I've something to tell you," she said, her voice trembling with both nerves and joy. Cole looked at her, heart quickening. "What is it, Ruby?" She took his hand, placed it against her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a child. November, if my reckonings are right." For a moment, Cole could only stare, wonder surging through him. Then the truth sank in new life, rising out of the sorrow that had once nearly broken him. "A child." His voice cracked. "Our baby." Ruby nodded, tears glimmering. "I hoped you'd be pleased." Pleased, Cole gathered her tight against him, his chest aching with joy. "Ruby, I'm overjoyed, truly overjoyed." In the soft warmth of spring, Cole Rollins held Ruby Dalton close, his eyes drawn to the wooden cross that marked Maybel Hart's resting place. Though he couldn't reason it out, he felt sure she approved, that somehow she had known this would be the end of the road she set him on when she begged him to write her sister. "Thank you." He whispered the words, meant for both the woman who had been his first love and the one who had taught him to love again. That winter, on a snowy November night, Ruby brought their daughter into the world, with Hattie Boone serving as midwife. They named her Josie Rollins, Josie for her own sake, Elizabeth for the sister who had tied them together. She came squalling with Maybel's golden hair and Ruby's firm little chin, and from the moment she took her first breath, she became the center of their world. Cole cradled his newborn, awed by the tiny perfection of her features. Just 2 years earlier, he had believed his life ended with Maybel's last breath. Now, as Ruby watched him from their bed, weary but radiant, he understood a truth he had never grasped before, that endings could carry the seeds of new beginnings. "She's beautiful," he whispered, easing the swaddled bundle back into Ruby's waiting arms, "just like her mama." "Both of her mamas," Ruby corrected, gently honoring the memory of her sister. Cole swallowed hard, emotion thick in his throat. "Both of her mamas," he echoed. Outside, snow drifted down, cloaking the valley in pure white. Inside, firelight danced across the cabin walls, casting a warm glow over the little family. The cowboy who had lost nearly everything. The woman who came only to help, but stayed to build a new life, and the child who bound them to the future. It wasn't the life they'd once envisioned, yet it was beautiful all the same, a testament to the stubborn strength of the heart and the unexpected roads love could carve in the wild, untamed West. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.